Story 1. They say the dead never truly leave, especially when you keep making room for them at the table. I used to laugh at that idea, but after what happened last Halloween, I don't laugh anymore. I barely sleep. It started like every other year. Mom, Dad, my sister Lily and I were getting ready for our annual Halloween dinner. It was our family's tradition ever since Grandma died. She loved Halloween, the decorations, the candles, even the creepy old records she'd play during dinner. And every year since she passed, Mom made sure we kept her memory alive. We'd place an extra chair at the table, Grandma's chair, a full setting too, plate, silverware, even a folded napkin. It's just our way of remembering her, Mom always said. I never questioned it, until that night. The storm outside had started early, rattling the windows and making the lights flicker. The smell of roast chicken filled the air, and the four of us gathered at the long dining table. The fifth chair, Grandma's, sat at the far end, empty, waiting. The candlelight made the room look warm, but the shadows stretched too far, moving strangely across the walls. "Happy Halloween," Dad said, raising his glass. "Happy Halloween," we echoed. When we began eating, I noticed how quiet it was. No music, no wind, just the soft clink of cutlery. Then Lily, who was only 8, stopped chewing. Her fork dangled in the air, and she pointed toward the empty chair. "The spoon moved," she whispered. Mom sighed. "Lily, stop trying to scare us." But I turned to look. The silver spoon beside Grandma's plate was slowly rocking back and forth as if someone had brushed it. I blinked, thinking it must be from a draft or vibration. But then it stopped, and the knife began to lift. Dad laughed nervously. Must be the old house shaking from the wind. But the windows were shut. The air was still. The candle flames burned perfectly straight. Then the weirdest thing happened. The chicken on Grandma's plate, which no one had touched, had a bite missing. I saw it happen. A small piece rose from the plate, hung midair for a second, and vanished. Lily gasped. "She's eating, Dad! She's eating!" Dad stood up, his chair screeching back. "That's enough! We're not doing this!" But before he could grab the plate, the air suddenly turned ice cold. My breath came out in white clouds. The chandelier above us flickered wildly as if in panic. The room stank of old perfume, Grandma's perfume. Mom's voice trembled. Do you all smell that?" Before any of us could answer, a soft laugh came from the kitchen, slow and raspy, like someone who hadn't used their voice in years. Heh. 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 I'll never forget that sound. It was Grandma's laugh. Every hair on my neck stood up. Lily began crying. Dad stormed into the kitchen shouting, "Who's there?" But the kitchen lights flickered and went out completely. He didn't come back for several seconds, and when he did, his face was pale as chalk. "There's no one there," he whispered, "but the back door's open." The laughing started again, this time closer, coming from the dining table. The silverware clattered violently, the plates rattled. The roast pan slid toward the middle of the table as if pulled by invisible hands. Mom grabbed Lily's hand. "Everyone to the car," she whispered urgently. I was about to stand when the chair at the head of the table, the empty one, moved. It scraped loudly against the floor, pulling itself closer. The candles flickered. Then, right before our eyes, the air above the chair began to shimmer like heat on a summer road. A shape started to form. Slowly, an outline of a woman appeared. Thin, stooped, wearing what looked like Grandma's old shawl. Her face wasn't clear at first, just a dark haze. But as she became sharper, I saw her smile. Her lips were stretched too wide, and her teeth, oh God, her teeth were black as soot. "You finally set a plate for me," she whispered. Her voice was wet, gurgling, like she was choking on dirt. Lily screamed, Mom fainted. Dad rushed to grab her, but his arm passed right through the figure like smoke. Only I stayed frozen where I was, unable to move, unable to breathe. Grandma, or whatever she had become, turned her head toward me slowly. Her empty eyes glowed faintly in the candlelight. "Why didn't you invite me sooner?" she rasped. "I've been waiting, watching you eat, all these years." The lights went out, pitch black. In the darkness, I heard the cutlery clinking again. Someone chewing, something soft brushing my hand under the table. I screamed and slammed my head on the edge of the table, trying to crawl away. Then everything went silent. When I woke up, the candles had burned out. The chair was gone. My parents were sitting on the floor, holding Lily, staring at the spot where Grandma had appeared. None of us spoke. The house felt hollow, empty, but the smell of her perfume still lingered in the air. We don't set a fifth chair anymore. We stopped celebrating Halloween altogether, but sometimes, when I eat dinner alone at night, I still hear it. The faint clink of a spoon, a slow, raspy laugh coming from an empty seat, and every time I whisper a shaky prayer, hoping she's finally found her peace, but deep down, I know she hasn't. Story 2. If we hadn't moved into that quiet little neighborhood last fall, I might still sleep through the night. But every time I close my eyes, I see their faces, the neighbors who smiled so warmly, and the others who never moved at all. It started 2 days before Halloween, when our new neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Dalloway, dropped by. They were an elderly couple, white hair, flawless manners, always dressed as if they were expecting guests. Mr. Dalloway offered a polite smile and said, "We host a small dinner every Halloween night for close friends. We'd be so pleased if you and your wife could join us." My wife Anna was thrilled. She loved anything spooky or traditional, and since we were new to town, she thought it'd be a fun way to meet people. I wasn't as excited. There was something off about the Dalloways. Their friendliness felt rehearsed, like reading lines from a play. Still, we went. Halloween night arrived cold and quiet. Fog covered the yard like smoke, and the Dalloways' house glowed warmly at the end of the street. As soon as we stepped inside, the smell hit me, sweet but metallic, like copper mixed with overcooked meat. The dining room was enormous. A long wooden table stretched across the room, filled with candles, antique silverware, and silver dishes covered with shining domes. What caught my eye, though, were the people sitting around the table. There were at least 8 of them. Elderly men and women, all dressed beautifully, completely still, not blinking, not shifting, just sitting. Mr. Dalloway noticed my glance and chuckled. "Ah, our family. They're a quiet bunch, but wonderful company." Anna smiled awkwardly and whispered, "Maybe they're just asleep." Mrs. Dalloway led us to our seats at the far end of the table. "So glad you could join us," she said, her voice soft as silk. "We rarely welcome new friends." The dinner began politely enough. We were served soup first, dark, thick, tasting faintly of iron. I swallowed a spoonful and forced a smile, pretending it was delicious. The Dalloways watched every bite. "It's very unique," Anna said, hesitating between compliments. Mr. Dalloway nodded, pleased. "We only cook for those who join our family," he said. Anna laughed nervously. "That's sweet." But I wasn't laughing. Something about the way he said it, flat, certain, made my stomach twist. I looked back at the silent guests. Their eyes were open, glassy, fixed on nothing. One woman's hand hung just barely off the table, skin pale and waxy, like a mannequin's. Mr. Dalloway noticed my stare again. "Oh, we do love our traditions," he said, smiling wide enough to show yellowed teeth. "Our family keeps growing every year." Dessert arrived next, small tarts topped with bright red jelly. Anna took a bite and frowned. "It tastes like metal?" Mrs. Dalloway finished for her, eyes glinting. "Yes, that's our secret ingredient." Something clicked in my brain. That smell, that taste, the way the others looked. I pushed my plate away. the metallic scent suddenly unbearable. My chest tightened as realization dawned. The family surrounding us weren't mannequins. They were people, preserved like trophies. I could see the faint stitching around one man's wrist. Another's neck was cracked, skin peeling at the edge like dried paper. Anna noticed it too. Her fork clattered as she backed away from the table. "Oh my God." "Please," Mrs. Dalloway said sweetly, rising to her feet. "Don't be alarmed. They're at peace. Soon, you will be too." The candles flickered violently. Shadows swayed on the walls, bending unnaturally. That's when we realized the hands weren't just from the two old hosts. Something cold brushed my neck. I spun around and saw fingers, gray and stiff, reaching out from behind the chair. Hands, too many hands, clawed their way up over the table's edge. The preserved bodies were moving. Anna screamed. I grabbed her arm, but the floor seemed to tilt beneath us. The air reeked of blood and chemicals. One of the figures turned its head toward me, slowly, painfully, and whispered, "Stay for dessert." The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. In the dark, I could hear Anna's breathing, rapid and terrified. Then a low, wet sound, like tearing fabric. She screamed again, and something yanked her from my grip. "Anna!" A cold hand clamped over my mouth. A whisper tickled my ear. "You're part of us now," it said. Then I felt the prick of something sharp pressing against my neck. A warmth spread down my shirt as everything faded to black. When I woke, I couldn't move. My body was stiff, my vision blurred. I could see the dining room, but not from where I remembered. I was sitting at the table, still, silent. A candle flickered inches from my face. Across from me sat Anna. Her eyes were open but lifeless, lips stretched into a frozen, polite smile. The Dalloways hovered nearby, placing new plates on the table, humming an old tune. Mr. Dalloway looked right at me and whispered, "Welcome to the family." The candlelight shimmered against my eyes, eyes that I could no longer close. Story 3. They say mirrors never lie, but that night, ours did. And in the end, they stole everything. It all began when my family moved into Hollow Ridge Manor, a huge, crumbling mansion on the edge of a lonely town. My father had inherited it from some distant relative we'd never heard of. He said it was a lucky surprise, but the place didn't feel lucky. It felt cold, empty, watching. The mansion had countless rooms, creaking floors, and walls that whispered when the wind passed through. But the grand dining hall was the strangest of all. Its walls were covered in enormous antique mirrors, each framed in blackened gold, stretching from floor to ceiling. No matter where you sat, you could see your reflection from every possible angle, infinitely repeating yourself in every direction. Mom thought it was beautiful. Dad said it would be perfect for hosting our first Halloween dinner. I wasn't so sure. Halloween night arrived sharp and silent. The sky outside was deep gray, and the mansion seemed to hum faintly in the dark, like it was waiting. Dad was excited, lighting candles along the long mahogany table. Their flickering glow danced across the mirrors, throwing strange shapes that didn't quite match our movements. There were 5 of us: Dad, Mom, my little sister Emily, my older brother Samuel, and me. Emily was 6, all giggles and curiosity. Samuel, 17, was the kind who never got scared, until that night. We began dinner in good spirits. The roast smelled perfect. The chandelier flickered above us, and for a while, everything felt almost normal. Almost. Then I noticed something wrong. In the mirror across from me, my reflection was chewing slower than I was. Its movements seemed delayed, like an old film reel lagging a few seconds behind. I blinked and looked again, thinking I was imagining it. This time, my reflection wasn't smiling like I was. It was frowning, its eyes dark, almost hateful. I tapped Samuel's arm. "Hey, look at your reflection," he laughed. "Why?" To admire myself? But when he turned toward the nearest mirror, his expression changed. That's weird," he muttered. In the glass, his reflection wasn't looking back at him. It was staring straight at me. Mom scolded us for whispering. "Stop making up stories. It's bad enough this place echoes like a tomb," Dad chuckled awkwardly. "They're just mirrors, kids. Old glass plays tricks on your eyes." But soon, even he stopped eating. Emily had dropped her fork, and as it clattered to the ground, every one of us instinctively looked down. Every reflection looked down, too, except hers. Her reflection remained perfectly still, staring straight ahead with a wide grin stretching across its face. Then it slowly tilted its head, like a puppet whose strings had gone slack. "Mom," Emily whispered, "why is mine smiling?" Before Mom could answer, the reflection of Samuel suddenly stood up from its chair, though the real Samuel hadn't moved an inch. The mirrored version pressed its hands against the inside of the glass, palms flat and pale. Dad's chair scraped backward. "Everyone away from the table!" he shouted, but we couldn't move. It was as if the air had turned to syrup, heavy and suffocating. The reflections in the mirrors, all of them, began to rise one by one. Some smiled, others scowled, but their eyes were the same, dark pits, glistening like oil. My own reflection leaned close to the surface of the glass, whispering something I couldn't hear. Its lips moved slowly, then stopped. A faint cracking sound echoed through the hall as the mirrors began to tremble. Then Samuel's reflection stepped out. The glass rippled like water as his mirrored twin pushed through, dripping with a thin, silvery liquid. It looked exactly like him, but colder, darker, its grin spreading wider and wider. Samuel screamed as it grabbed his shoulders and yanked him toward the mirror. His body hit the glass hard, but instead of shattering, it swallowed him whole. The sound it made wasn't just noise, it was a wet sucking pull, like someone gasping for air underwater. Mom rushed forward, screaming his name. Dad held her back, shouting, "Don't touch it! Don't you dare!" But in the reflection, the mirrored versions of Mom and Dad were already standing, moving with slow, graceful precision. They looked so calm, as if they'd been waiting for this moment forever. The reflections began reaching through the glass, their hands cold and slick, grabbing whatever they could. One seized Mom by the wrist and pulled. She screamed, high and raw, but within seconds, she was gone too. Emily cried out, crawling under the table. I dove after her, but then hands, my own hands, clamped around my neck. My reflection was dragging me upward. Its grin was the last thing I saw before my face hit the surface of the mirror. Everything went cold. I don't remember being pulled through. It felt like drowning in darkness. When I finally opened my eyes, I was sitting back at the table. Everyone was there. Mom, Dad, Samuel, Emily. But something was different. Everything shimmered faintly, too bright, too sharp. I looked around and saw another version of us, in the mirror, screaming, pounding their fists, faces twisted with terror. I reached out toward them, but my hand hit invisible glass. It was then I realized we were inside the mirror now. On the other side, our reflections sat perfectly still, smiling peacefully, picking up their forks again. The candlelight flickered, reflecting endlessly through the room of mirrors, until it felt like there were millions of us. Millions of silent, smiling monsters pretending to be human, and they're still there, eating, laughing, living our lives. Sometimes when someone visits the manor, they look into the mirrors and say how lifelike the reflections seem. They have no idea. Story 4. Have you ever looked into a mirror and felt like the person staring back wasn't really you? I used to think that was just imagination, until the night my family vanished and their reflections kept eating dinner without them. When my father inherited Hollowmere Manor, he called it a fresh start. To me, it looked like a place that didn't want to be lived in. The mansion was enormous, with high ceilings, dusty chandeliers, and a grand dining hall lined with antique mirrors from floor to ceiling. There were at least 20, all old, with cloudy glass and ornate frames carved with strange symbols. We moved in a week before Halloween. By the second night, I already hated it. The house creaked and sighed like it was breathing. Sometimes when I walked through the hallways, I'd catch glimpses of movement in the mirrors, shadows that didn't belong to me. On Halloween morning, Dad announced, "We're hosting our first family dinner tonight, in the grand hall." Mom forced a smile, but her hands trembled as she set silverware on the long oak table. My younger sister, Sophie, was twirling in her orange dress, pretending to be excited. My older brother, Daniel, leaned against a wall, smirking. In a haunted mansion? Sure, what could go wrong? By evening, the house glowed with candlelight. We sat down 10 minutes past 7. The chandelier above us flickered but didn't go out. Every flame from the candles reflected back 100 times in the mirrors around us. It felt like dining in a room full of silent strangers. Mom served the roast. The smell was wonderful. Her way of pretending nothing about this house felt wrong. For a while, it was almost normal. We passed bowls, made small jokes, and laughed. But somewhere amid the laughter, I began to notice it. The reflections in the mirrors weren't matching us anymore. At first, it was just me who noticed. In the nearest mirror, my reflection brought a fork to its mouth, half a second late, like a glitch. Then Mom smiled in real life, but in her reflection, she didn't. Her mirrored face stayed still, eyes locked on me. "Mom," I whispered, "look at the mirrors." She turned, frowned. "What about them?" Her reflection didn't frown, it grinned. That wide, unnatural grin made my stomach twist. "Dad!" I started, but before I could finish, Daniel's fork slipped from his hand and clanged against the floor. We all looked toward him and gasped. His reflection hadn't moved. It was still sitting straight. Then, slowly, deliberately, it stood up. "That's not—" Daniel began, but stopped mid-sentence. The reflection tilted its head, studying him with a strange animal curiosity. Then it walked forward, hands pressed against the inside of the glass. The surface rippled like water beneath its palms. Mom screamed. Dad pushed his chair back, shouting, "Everyone away from the mirrors!" But before anyone could move, the reflection stepped out. It was Daniel. Just wrong. Paler, eyes darker, smile stretched too wide. It grabbed the real Daniel by the shoulders. Daniel shouted and tried to break free, but the thing's grip tightened, and then Daniel was pulled backward, straight through the glass. There was no shatter, only a low, wet slurp as the surface swallowed him whole. Mom ran to the mirror, pounding on it. "Daniel! Daniel!" But his reflection, the other Daniel, was sitting calmly at the table again, eating soft bites of roast chicken with a polite smile. That was when the others started moving. Each mirror rippled as the reflections detached from us, moving differently now, faster, laughing silently. I saw Sophie's reflection crawl onto the table on all fours, black drool slipping from its mouth. Dad grabbed Sophie, trying to carry her out of the room, but the mirror behind them pulsed and shattered like liquid. Pale hands burst through, dragging them both in before I could blink. Mom screamed and grabbed me. "Run!" We stumbled toward the door, but our reflections were already there, an army of smiling, hollow versions of ourselves. Mom swung her arm through one, but it felt solid, cold like ice. "Please," she begged, "please stop." The mirrored version of her placed a finger on its lips and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then it grabbed her by the arm and pulled. She slipped away from me, screaming my name as she disappeared into the glass. And then, silence. Every reflection returned to its place around the table. Mom's mirror self smoothed her hair, smiled sweetly, and poured wine. Daniel's reflection refilled his plate. Dad's reflection carved another slice of meat. I stood there frozen, the only one left. Then I saw my reflection turn to me. It didn't move slow or hesitant. It smiled knowingly, as if this had all been planned. It stood up, walked to the glass, and reached out. I staggered back, but the footsteps echoed behind me too. They weren't coming from the mirrors anymore. The lights flickered. I tripped and fell, the air thick and cold. My reflection crouched beside me, bending its head close to mine. It whispered, voice soft and hollow, "Join us." The last thing I remember was a hand grabbing my wrist and cold glass wrapping around me like water. When I opened my eyes again, everything was quiet. The candles were still burning. The room looked peaceful, perfect. My family was smiling politely, finishing their meal. I sat down to join them, though I'm still not sure if it's me or my reflection that's eating now. If you ever visit Hollowmere Manor and catch a glimpse of us in the mirrors, be careful, because the glass sometimes ripples, and once it does, you'll never know which side you're really on. Story 5. People say that family recipes keep memories alive, but I've learned that sometimes those memories should stay buried. It all started last Halloween, our first one in the new house. We'd moved to a quiet little town a few weeks earlier, into a creaky old farmhouse that had once belonged to my great-grandmother. Mom was thrilled. She said the place had character, while Dad said it needed a lot of fixing. But the attic was mine to explore. I loved dusty old places, and that attic was packed with ancient boxes, faded photographs, and brittle books whose pages smelled like mold. And tucked away in one corner, I found a small wooden chest, painted orange and carved with pumpkin vines twisting across the surface. Inside, it lay an old, handwritten cookbook. The cover read, "Harvest Delights, Recipes for the Soul." That night, I brought it downstairs, and Mom's eyes lit up. "Oh, how beautiful," she said. "We'll make something from it for our Halloween dinner." Dad chuckled. "As long as it's edible and not haunted." Mom flipped through the yellowed pages until she found one that made her smile. "Pumpkin pie," she said. "Perfect for tonight." The recipe looked ordinary at first. Pumpkin puree, sugar, spices, but near the bottom, I noticed something strange written in shaky handwriting. "Add 1 piece of the cook's soul for flavor." I laughed, thinking it was a dark joke. "It says the cook's soul, Mom. You sure this is safe?" She smirked. Probably just someone's weird sense of humor. The kitchen smelled amazing while she baked. Cinnamon, nutmeg, and roasted pumpkin filled the air. We decorated the table with candles, leaves, and empty bowls filled with candy corn. The beautiful pie sat in the center, steaming slightly, its golden brown surface glistening. When we finally sat down, Mom looked proud. "To our first Halloween in the new house," she said. "To the best pie ever," Dad added, raising his fork. The first bite was incredible, sweet, creamy, rich. But after a few mouthfuls, Dad started coughing. At first, it seemed like he just choked a little. But then he spat something into his napkin. Tiny, wet pumpkin seeds. "Did one of the pumpkins have seeds in it?" Mom asked, frowning. Dad shook his head, wiping his mouth. Then my brother, Luke, began coughing too. Dozens of seeds rolled down his chin and onto the plate. I dropped my fork. "Mom, what's happening?" Before she could answer, an odd sound filled the room, a faint rustling, like dry leaves moving under the floorboards. Then something cold brushed against my ankle. I looked down. Thin green vines were creeping out from beneath the table, twisting up our legs. Mom gasped, trying to pull them away, but they only tightened, leaving red marks on her skin. "The pie!" she cried. Look at the pie!" We turned our eyes toward it. The surface, which had been smooth and perfect moments ago, was now rippling faintly, like water disturbed by a breeze. Our reflections shimmered across it, distorted and trembling. And then, the reflections began to scream. Silent, wide-mouthed, terrified versions of our faces, clawing toward the surface of the pie as if trapped inside it. Dad grabbed the dish to throw it away, but the moment he touched it, a streak of orange light shot up his arm. He staggered backward, his eyes rolling white, and collapsed against the counter. The smell of scorched flesh filled the room. Mom screamed his name, shaking him, but his body was already stiff, his skin faintly glowing orange beneath the light. The walls around us began to pulse. Thick orange veins spread across the wallpaper, throbbing gently, as if a heart were beating inside the house itself. Vines slithered up the furniture, across the ceiling, even over the mirror on the far wall. I tried to pull Luke free, but the vines were too strong. They had already wrapped around his chest and neck. His eyes bulged as he struggled to breathe. Mom stumbled over to the cookbook lying open on the counter. "It's the recipe," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It said, a piece of the cook's soul." I used my blood when I nicked my finger mixing the batter. That's what it took. It used me. The vines wrapped tighter around her waist, dragging her toward the table. She grabbed the book and threw it into the fireplace, screaming, "Take me, but leave them!" The flames swallowed the pages, and the moment the last one burned, the house shook violently. Then everything went still. The vines drooped lifeless, the pulsing stopped. The pie on the table hardened and cracked down the middle. "Mom?" I whispered. She was gone. Only her wedding ring lay near the table, twisted among shriveled vines. Luke was slumped unconscious beside me, breathing faintly. Dad's body never turned back to normal. It stayed pale and cold. Days later, when the townspeople came, they called it a gas leak accident. No one believed my story. Not about the vines, not about the pie, not about the book. But sometimes, when I walk past the kitchen, I still smell it. The faint sweetness of pumpkin pie drifting through the air. Last night, I heard a sound I haven't heard since that night. A soft rustle. And when I turned toward the counter, there it was again. The cookbook, unburned, open to the same page. And at the bottom, written in fresh ink, was a new line. "Now it's your turn, dear." Story 6. Have you ever heard your own name on the radio, followed by the exact time you're supposed to die? I'll never forget the night that happened. Halloween had always been my father's favorite holiday. He loved everything about it, the costumes, the candy, the silly pranks. Even after we grew up, he insisted on hosting Halloween dinners every year at our old family home. That night, the house smelled like roasted meat and cinnamon candles. The dining room glowed in warm orange light from the jack-o'-lanterns perched along the windowsill. There were 5 of us at the table: Dad, Mom, my sister Lily, my younger brother Ben, and me. As always, Dad had something special planned to set the mood. While we were eating, he grinned and said, "Guess what I found in the garage today?" He placed an old radio on the table, big, boxy, with a cracked speaker and a faded dial that barely moved. It looked like something straight out of the 1940s. "I cleaned it up this morning," he said proudly. "Still works like new? Let's play some Halloween tunes." He turned the dial, and static filled the air, followed by the faint sound of eerie piano music. It gave me chills, but Lily laughed. "Creepy, but perfect," she said. The radio played an old jazz number for a few seconds before crackling again. Then a voice came through. Not a singer, not a DJ. Just a cold, flat voice that said, "This is a special Halloween broadcast. Breaking news. Tonight's casualties have been confirmed." The music cut completely. Silence filled the room, until the voice spoke again, slower this time. At exactly 7:42 p.m., Rebecca Matthews, death by choking. We all looked at each other. That was Mom's name. Ben snorted. "Nice one, Dad. Did you record this as a prank?" Dad frowned. "No, I didn't." Mom rolled her eyes, though her face had gone pale. "Very funny. What station is this?" Dad turned the dial back and forth, but all there was now was static. No music, no voice. Just that dry, crackling sound that made the room feel smaller. Then the voice came back, as clear as before. At 8:05 p.m., Benjamin Matthews, cause of death, severe blunt trauma. Ben laughed nervously. Okay, this is getting weird now. Cut it out, Dad. But the thing is, Dad wasn't smiling anymore. He switched off the radio, muttering, probably just a stupid Halloween broadcast, some kind of prank program. We tried to shake it off, but the mood was ruined. At 7:42 on the dot, Mom reached for her wine glass and started coughing. At first, we thought she was joking, pretending to match the prediction, but her face turned red, her throat straining. Dad leapt up, patting her back, but she couldn't breathe. He tried the Heimlich, desperate, shouting her name, but by the time she fell limp in his arms, it was too late. The room went silent, except for our gasps. The radio flicked back on by itself. The same voice whispered, "One confirmed," Lily screamed. Dad kicked the radio off the table. It hit the floor, but kept playing. At 8:05 p.m., Benjamin Matthews. Ben stumbled backward, shaking his head. "No, it's not real, it's not." A loud bang interrupted him. The dining room chandelier, hanging right above his chair, suddenly came loose and crashed to the floor with a blinding flash of sparks. When the smoke cleared, Ben was lying beneath it, motionless. Lily collapsed into sobs. Dad just stood there, whispering over and over, "This can't be happening." The radio hissed again. At 8:27 p.m., Lily Matthews, death by electrocution. Lily screamed and ran toward the kitchen. I bolted after her, yelling, "Don't touch anything!" But she grabbed the counter for balance. Her hand hit a metal toaster as lightning flashed outside. The power surged through the house. She fell instantly, convulsing, eyes wide open. The smell of burnt plastic and skin filled the room. I was shaking, tears burning my eyes. "Dad, it's us. We're next." He looked right at me, face gray. "Then we need to destroy it." He picked up the radio, smashing it against the wall. Sparks flew, but the voice came again, louder, clearer, almost amused now. At 8:46 p.m., Thomas Matthews, death by cardiac arrest. Dad froze. "That's me." He dropped the radio. It slid across the floor, still humming faintly. He clutched his chest, gasping. I caught him as he fell, but his eyes were already glazing over, mouth open in a soundless cry. I screamed and backed away, alone now in the flickering candlelight, every muscle trembling. The radio, now dented and crackling, whispered again. 8:59 p.m. Sarah Matthews, cause of death, unknown. That's me. The clock on the wall read 8:57. I grabbed the radio and threw it into the fireplace. It hissed as the flames ate through it. But even as it melted, the voice kept talking, softer now. 1 minute left, Sarah. The house began to hum. The remaining lights flickered like the dying glow of a candle. I ran for the door, but it slammed shut. My reflection in the window twisted, my own face smiling back at me. The radio's final words echoed through the house, deep and slow. All souls accounted for. End of transmission. Then, faintly, just before the flames died out, I heard it. Applause. Slow, mocking, echoing through every room. And now, whenever someone new moves into this house, they find the same radio sitting quietly on a shelf. Sometimes it turns on by itself and broadcasts a new list of names. For more stories like this, share and subscribe Goofy Horror.